On learning of Kutuzov's arrival, he immediately observed with an air of satisfaction that the Russian general could not have come for the purpose of continuing the retreat. He would certainly give battle. He would as certainly lose it, and deliver Moscow to us, for he was too near the capital to save it. Thanks were due to the Tsar for having made this change at such a moment, which could not have been more propitious. The Emperor commended Marshal Kutuzov on the score of his intelligence, but spoke of his ineptitude at Austerlitz and of his maneuvers there and in Turkey, adding that, with the finest army of the Russians had ever had on the Danube, he had not been able to make peace at the gates of Constantinople or to seize Wallachia. With an enfeebled and demoralized army, he would certainly not prevent the French from reaching Moscow. Kutuzov would have to give battle in order to please the nobles, and in a fortnight the Tsar would have neither a capital nor an army. True, this army would have had the honor of not yielding the ancient capital without a struggle, and this was probably the Tsar's intention in making this change in the command, as he could then make peace without incurring the reproaches and censure of the high nobles who had chosen Kutuzov, and upon whom in consequence could be imputed the effects of any reverses they might encounter. Undoubtedly, this had been his motive in yielding to his nobles. The emperor continued to question the Cossack, whose answers were all given with spirit and showed a degree of intelligence remarkable in a common soldier. If Alexander's Russian soldiers, especially his generals, were like the Cossacks, you and your Frenchmen would not be in Russia, he told the emperor. If Napoleon had had Cossacks in his army, he would have been emperor of China long ago. It is the Cossacks who do all the fighting. It is always their turn. While the Russians sleep, the Cossacks keep watch. The Cossacks will defend Moscow because of Alexander, who is a good prince, though his ministers and generals are deceiving him. His generals only fight when they have to. They have given up Smolensk, the holy, and that is a bad sign. If Moscow is taken and the French enter the Cossack country, Russia is lost. Cossacks are good soldiers. They will do their duty to the very last, and then they will all side with Napoleon. Napoleon is a great general. Alexander is a good Tsar. If he liked, Alexander would be the best general in Russia. Russian generals are too fond of their ease. They sleep too much. They must have the cushions and every comfort. They only think of themselves, not of their soldiers' needs. The French fight well, but they do not keep a good lookout. They like to pillage. They slip away from their units to hunt through houses, and the Cossacks profit by this and capture large numbers every day and recover their booty from them. Had it not been for the Cossacks, the French would have been in Moscow, in Petersburg, even in Kazan. It is the Cossacks who hold them up every day. The Cossacks, like the King of Naples, who makes a fine show, for he is a brave soldier and always the first to come under fire. Word has gone round that he is not to be killed, but they do want to take him prisoner. We found Gat September 1st, partly burned and still smoking. They had been caught at work sooner than at Vyazma. Attempts were made to stop the fire. The emperor made an extended reconnaissance in front of the city and all round it. He visited the hospital, which lay at the town gate and had not been burned. He speeded up the rebuilding of the bridges and the crossing of the troops. He did not return until very late. The time had come at last for the battle he had so ardently desired. He went over with relish all he had heard, adding to the following reflections. The new general cannot continue this plan of retreat, which is condemned by national opinion. He has been summoned to command the army on condition that he fights. Therefore, the system of warfare pursued hitherto must be changed. These considerations decided the emperor to prepare likewise for action. He spent the 2nd and 3rd at Gat in order to collect his troops and to give the cavalry and artillery a little rest. Feeling it needful to bring some order among the convoys that were blocking the roads, and thus giving the artillery a chance of getting to the front in time for the battle which he deemed imminent, the emperor ordered the burning of all vehicles that were jammed in front of the convoys. "I will even have my own carriage burned," he said to me the next day, "if it is out of its proper place." While proceeding on horseback, the emperor came across a number of carriages that were being driven out of column alongside an artillery train. He made the chasseurs of his bodyguard stop them, leap from his horse, and ordered the leading one to be burned. There were objections, and Monsieur Narbonne, whose carriage it was, pointed out that this might leave some officer stranded, should he lose his leg on the morrow. "It will lose me a lot more than that if I have no artillery tomorrow," answered the emperor. Straw and wood had to be fetched to start the fire. While this was going on, he had the caleche dismantled, and a light van following it was consigned to the same fate. As soon as the fire was lit, the emperor galloped off, and the drivers, I think, salvaged their somewhat singed vehicles. "I wish it had been your carriage," said the emperor to the Prince of Neuchâtel. "That would create more effect, and you deserve to lose it. I'm always running into it." "Behind your Majesty's carriage," answered the prince. "That is Caulaincourt's fault," rejoined the emperor. "Anyhow, I promised him I'll burn it if I come upon it. Do not be put out at my threat, for I will show no more mercy to my own carriage than to anyone else's. I am commander-in-chief, and I must set an example." On the 4th, headquarters were in bivouac near Prokofievo, and on the 5th near Borodino. The emperor stayed only a moment in his tent, which was pitched as usual in the middle of the guard square, but set off at once towards the attack which our right was making against 2 redoubts supporting the enemy's left. This attack was carried out with such vigor that we were masters of the forts in less than an hour. The troops were ordered to remain in position and the infantry in square. This was a wise act of foresight on the part of the emperor, because half an hour after dusk, and long after the action had taken place, Russian cuirassiers, supported by infantry, charged on our squares with great vigor, making for the redoubts, which they hoped to force us to evacuate and allow them to occupy during the confusion of the night attack. The first square, taken unawares, lost its artillery and some men. The others, put on their guard by firing, held firm, and the Russian cuirassiers, badly mauled by our guns and musket fire and ill supported in their attack, were obliged to retire and leave us to these redoubts, which were the key of their position. Our troops even gained a little ground when they pursued them in the dark, and we established ourselves at the edge of a wood, which it was of the utmost importance for the enemy to retain, if only to delay our attack and afford a post from which to observe our movements. During the night, the emperor went through our encampment, inspected the captured redoubts, rode several times up and down the line to judge with his own eyes as to the enemy positions and their strengths at this point. At the same time, he visited his troops, as was his custom, on the eve of battle. At daybreak, September 6th, the emperor went once more to the principal redoubt, and under cover of the wood, the whole of which had been occupied during the night, he and the Prince of Neuchâtel and I approached very close to the enemy position. His Majesty then traversed the whole extent of the line, more particularly the center and the left, which he reconnoitred as far as the outposts. He returned once again to the center, occupied by the King of Naples, so that he could explain all his dispositions on the spot. He then visited the extreme right, which was under the command of Prince Poniatowski, who had fought a brilliant engagement at the head of his Poles on the previous day and had gained much ground. The resistance of the Russians at this point was not what it ought to have been, nor what it had been elsewhere. The emperor hesitated whether he should make a large movement on his right to turn the enemy position and partly avoid his redoubts, or whether he should simply take advantage of the 2 redoubts he had captured and engage their center from the front and flank by launching an attack with our right. He was apprehensive lest the first of these plans, which would have threatened the enemy from the rear, would decide the Russians to make another retreat, especially as the loss of the redoubts which had been captured the previous day had greatly weakened their position. These considerations determined him to adopt the latter plan. Seeing the enemy at ease in their positions, the emperor decided to let the army rest during that day. This would also give him an opportunity of bringing into line the artillery reserves and whatever had gotten slightly to the rear. He also thought, and this was the last consideration determined him, that the enemy, who had come at nightfall to retake the redoubts essential to the support of their left, would make some efforts during the day to recapture that position, or at least make some efforts to recover the ground gained by the Poles. If they did this, The emperor hoped for an engagement which would produce exceedingly advantageous results for himself, but the day was spent on both sides in observing one another, except on the part of the Poles, who gained a little more ground, thus allowing us a very advantageous deployment on the enemy's flank for the Moros' attack.